Good evening, everyone. I'm watching many friendly faces and names pop into the participant list, so we're excited to have you this evening for our second 2021 Days at the Statehouse virtual, what we're terming a fireside chat. Doesn't look like any of the participants have a fire behind them this evening, but hopefully on this cold Kansas day, you all are staying warm. Again, I want to welcome you, and we're really excited about the guest we have tonight. He has a new title in his name, but he has been a friend of Farm Bureau and a friend of agriculture throughout his public service career. But it is the new president of the Kansas Senate, Ty Masterson. I'm actually going to turn it over to John Donnelly. And John, go ahead and introduce yourself and introduce our special guest this evening.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. And I guess for all the members out there, this is going to be a different occurrence with our normal day at the Statehouse being unable to be conducted this year. As those of you that were on the Fireside Chat over the weekend know, that this is the decision that we made to try to get people involved and informed and get in front of some of the leadership of both at the executive branch and the legislative branch as well. So we are lucky tonight, very fortunate tonight, to have the Senate President, Senator Ty Masterson, join us. As a little background, Senator Masterson first came to Topeka from Andover in the House. I believe spent 2 terms in the House and then ran for the Senate. I believe your first term was in 2008, so this would be the start of your 4th term, and was just elected by his colleagues as president of the Senate. The senator has been a longtime friend of Farm Bureau. I've been doing ag policy, actually, I think since your first session. I think we might have started at the same time, and I'm trying to think of a vote where you weren't with us. So he's been a great friend of Farm Bureau. And with that, Mr. President, I will turn it over to you for some opening comments before we get to any questions.
Well, thank you, John. I think you probably would be hard pressed to find a vote where we weren't on the same page. So it's for those, my district, by the way, in my time here, because I've been through the redistricting process 10 years ago, has changed. I came in as a rural senator. I had all of Butler County and most all of Greenwood County. Predominantly, my largest city had 11,700 people in it. So, but since then, being relatively close, obviously, to Wichita, that redistricting really drew me in, and now I'm kind of 50-50. But so the new people see me as almost like a Wichita legislator. And I have to remind them I'm from Butler County. I'm not from Sedgwick. So. And actually, my father was a member of the Farm Bureau as we grew up. So very interested in those issues. Actually, speaking of redistricting, just jumping to that, that's a priority I think you guys would be interested in. And it is, I will, at this point, probably chair our redistricting or reapportionment committee myself. And the goal, I would really have a goal to still save the rural voice as it pertains to that, because, as the demographics shift, in Kansas, that becomes increasingly important. I mean, there's no question that, the Johnson County area, Northeast is, it's significantly growing. And so there'll be, this may be one of the last few times, unless we can change some trends, in which we can really save the rural voice in Topeka. And so just so you know, I don't even think I told you that myself, John, that that's one of the priorities we have with redistricting. I mean, obviously, as a Republican, I want to elect Republicans, but saving that rural voice is key. That being said, and I don't know, I'd almost rather just open up and let's talk about the issues important to you guys. I think, apologize, I wasn't more prepared for this. It seems like I've been on Zoom or something all day long and didn't have, but I'd be glad and actually prefer, honestly, it's probably more important that I hear from you and your members than it is for you to hear from me, because I'm up here to represent people just like you. So if you're okay, I'd rather jump right into the questions.
That sounds great, Mr. President, and we appreciate your comments on redistricting, and we recognize the changing population of the state and the nation, where rural voices are, the representation will get, I don't want to say weaker and weaker, but we have to work at developing those relationships with our urban legislative friends. And I know you do a great job of doing that within your caucus and within the body as a whole. I guess I'm going to throw it out there, probably not an ag specific one, but I think everyone cares and everyone's watching. But with COVID dominating the public conscious right now, I know the legislature extended the emergency powers the state through the end of March, I believe, is what the last bill did. But what are some of your general thoughts on that subject, and specifically, I guess, as it relates to rural Kansas, and where do you see that going as the discussion moves forward from your perspective?
Well, it's a really good question, and really what we have to tackle as it pertains to COVID is, the Emergency Management Act and how it was applied. I mean, everybody has now come to understand that all that language is embedded for local floods, fires, tornadoes, right? And so there's very expansive powers that get, I think, very misapplied, particularly in our rural areas. We tried to put there were executive powers implemented that allowed for, some overreach. I mean, it's from my perspective, it's government's responsibility and part of our obligation to help our businesses stay open and to function. And it just made me ache that you could have a couple, whether it's their local little restaurant or whatever, and they put their life savings into it, and then we've told them by edict that you can't have customers. That is dangerously close to a taking, right? And then we have constitutional rights, and we need to make sure we exist to maintain those rights for people, not to take them. And we have to keep in mind, and I know there's a lot of fear that was out there during this pandemic, and some legitimate. Some of that, goes back to our different worldviews and what that means to when something like that hits. But it's most important to maintain those constitutional rights and to protect our people in the middle of an emergency, because that's what gets used to strip those away. And that's when it's most difficult, is when everybody has some level of fear. So I think the biggest challenge we have right now with COVID is getting the Emergency Management Act in place and there might have to be two parallel paths there, right? How that might get applied to a tornado, for example, where you've got massive destruction, open gas lines and things where you might have to have some more broader controls of that localized spot. Might still have to have a path, but that is different when you have what we had in the pandemic. I mean, we really had an instance that I just heard about this one last night, where you had a 30,000-foot warehouse with one guy working in it, and because he was not deemed essential, was not able to go to work, right, and shut this place down. And so that has to be avoided, right? We have to be able to, particularly in our rural areas where the farming community and stuff. I mean, and I know a lot of that was deemed essential, but there's something fundamentally wrong with any bureaucrat saying you're essential and your neighbor's not. And we have to deal with that at that level. So I'd say with COVID, it's really, we've learned a lot. Clearly it won't be the last one, that happens. I think this type of thing, given the world condition, has not like it has the likelihood of coming back, and who knows what we're tackling. So the process changes are in better place, but we have to get a hold of what that looks like moving forward if we were to tackle this again.
Yeah, that's great. Appreciate that answer. I guess one thing I'm going to throw one out there that we'll see how it goes. I know if you look at the governor and yourself on the political spectrum, you're not in the same spot. However, I know you've worked with her for many, many years. As you work through some of these situations, whether it be the COVID bill or whatever, knowing you and the governor's style, I suspect that there's a working relationship there. You may not agree on the policy, but could you kind of describe how you go about that? Right now we have super majorities in both the House and the Senate with conservative control. The governor recognizes that at some level those communications have to happen for effective governance. And I guess, can you just tell the people out there how there's always pressure, there's always tenseness, but
yeah,
a general sense of how you feel that's going right now and where we can go from there in the future.
Sure, you bet. And I mean, it is important. It's something that's being lost in the general public, and that is the ability to have difficult conversations about very complicated subjects and have fundamental disagreements, but still have a civil conversation about it. And that's, so that's what some of these issues reach to. I do have the advantage in the sense that Governor Kelly, Laura was my ranking Democrat for 4 years on a committee I chaired. We developed a good working relationship in that regard. We do not agree on much. I mean, she is definitely on the spectrum, of ideology, or on the further end of the left, right? And so, and of course, I like to call myself center right, but I'm sure she'd call me, far right. It's all wherever you place the middle, right? It's, I think I fundamentally represent Kansas a lot better. And so, but we have I've got a good working relationship also with her staff. And so, and even with another thing that has helped, when we have a new minority leader in the Senate, who, by the way, was a Republican 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago. So, anyway, we have a good working relationship there as well. And I think that was exemplified our first week up. We did kind of Kima 1, I call it, moving some dates back and extending some of those limitations that we had put on checks and balances we had put on the executive power in HB 2016 from last year, extending those checks and balances. And then the property tax transparency piece, the truth in taxation came off in bipartisan fashion. We had a good debate, and both those bills passed in bipartisan fashion. And I mean bipartisan in honesty, right? I'd like to say bipartisan, but it's often the most liberal Republicans and the Democrats, which ideologically are the same. And they call that bipartisan because you got two registered parties. This truly was bipartisan. We had conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats on the bill. And so I thought that was a great foot forward in how we, are working together. And, at some point we are going to clash on a big issue. But I think at this point we're pretty agreeable. I think we have some understanding that if you attack someone personally in the public sphere, you should expect a personal attack in return. But the rhetoric in the general public is not healthy right now, from both sides. My perspective, of course, is because of where I stand. The left is more angry from my perspective, but there's anger on both sides, and it's hard to have those discussions sometimes to get through the dislike, the distrust, the frustration to what is the problem and what can we do. Well, should we do something? If we should, what should that be? But right now, I'm optimistic, and we're functioning well even in this COVID environment in the Capitol. We're doing pretty prolific testing. We're doing, and that's actually, I think, been the most beneficial. And then doing some distancing, that's also been well. We've only had one person in our chamber test positive, and it came from outside the Capitol, through family. So I think I am optimistic that we will be able to move past even these high value targets and get through to just normal course of business.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And we talked internally about, it was obvious you were trying to get the high value topics out of the way early and to be ready for whatever you might face. And you've been able to do that through some good leadership. You mentioned one of those, the property tax transparency bill, moving through, one that Farm Bureau supports. We thank you for your leadership on that and continue your continued work on that one. We think it's an important bill that can hopefully, property taxes are an important thing for everyone. We might talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but hopefully we can be able to at least get that transparency out there so the taxpayers out there know what's going on and have a chance. They feel like they have a chance to have a voice in the process. On that note, another really important piece of legislation that we are somewhat proud of was from 2 years ago. Your support and the many others' support of the Kansas Farm Bureau health plans. Number one, we thank you for what you did there. It's been a success. We've had, I think the last number was nearing 9,000, 10,000 covered lives that have already enrolled on that after the first year. We've really only been in effect for a little over 1 year. So that's a great positive story, and your all's caucus and the legislative leadership to make that happen was key. But there's always work to be done on rural health care, as you know, especially as we've gone through this pandemic. Do you have any ideas of some that may be coming forward, whether it be broadband, et cetera, on how we can continue to improve the access to rural health care.
Well, you probably nailed the big one, with broadband. Although, by the way, congratulations on the success of the association plan. I mean, we use it as an example. I mean, it's that kind of innovation, creativity that really is the solution long term. And so we're proud of what you guys have accomplished, proud of the votes we cast to give you that platform. There is, I mean, it's all related really to the depopulation issue, right? Rurally, that, so to get that care out there, broadband is going to be a very key piece of infrastructure. And I've been trying to convince others up here that, and we need to treat it like infrastructure, right? The development of rural Kansas is not going to be reliant upon, widening to a 3-lane highway to St. Francis, right? It's going to be getting a connection like that, a workable connection out rural where people can work. I think there's a chance, especially even in this with a pandemic, one of those things, people are going, hey, we don't need to be clustered up in the cities, right? I mean, they can get access to the ability to work from home. Rural Kansas is a wonderful place to live, right? I mean, just there's advantage to that. And so hopefully that's a flip side or a silver lining, if you will, to some of the issues that we're facing now, is that people are starting to see there's advantage, there's peace, out there. So I think that's what I was glad to see, with all this CARES and stimulus and recovery. And I'm not sure how that's going to go long-term with the trillions in debt, but at this point, the money flowing from that direction, I'm glad to see there is a focus on broadband that helps get that out there. So yeah, those are big. And we actually had one of our new senators out of Johnson County, but she was really engaged with the Trump administration and kind of the healthcare for you type. So we're trying to explore other ways that we can be creative along the lines of your association plan, where you can protect against pre-existing conditions, but and help people individually get better care without having to just expand to just a massive bureaucracy.
Perfect. We appreciate that. And Ryan, I'll throw it to you. I think we may have some questions coming from the audience that we can.
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks, Mr. President. For anybody that's interested, the Q&A function should be on the bottom of your Zoom there. So please go ahead and type any questions you have, and we'll certainly get those answered and addressed. But Mr. President, I guess, kind of going back on this property tax conversation, I know you've got a great, very open relationship with both Butler and Sedgwick County Farm Bureaus down in Senate District 16, but you talk about that urban growth, and certainly Andover and many other communities have had tremendous growth, especially on the commercial side. But what are you hearing just as we make up, the property tax mix between residential, commercial, certainly the use value on agriculture? I know there's a bill over on the House side that Kansas Farm Bureau will be testifying against next week that changes how use value is done. But just walk us through when you hear kind of the urban, rural, and commercial versus residential versus agriculture when it comes to property tax. What are you hearing in Topeka from where you sit?
Well, it's interesting. I did not know there was a bill on the House side that did the use value. That's good to know. It's not going to go very far over here. So even if it made it through the House, which I can't imagine it would, it's not going to go very far over here. We are in a budget time that's not easy, but it's certainly not as hard as it could have been, with the pandemic. But we do have, beyond the tax transparency, we're looking to do the decoupling that would allow some of the tax cuts federally that happened, under President Trump to be able to be realized by our Kansas people finally. So we're talking more on that side of things, kind of a relief package that would allow the deductions for property taxes and things like that allow our people to really take full advantage of that. And that's really the focus of the conversation on the Senate side. So beyond that, I don't see a lot of changes in any of the structure this year anyway. I've not seen any other proposals that are significant enough. So and I'd actually, since I had not heard that from the House, it has not even been a conversation in this case.
That's warming and reassuring. So thanks for that update. We've got a couple of questions that came in through Q&A, and one of them here is, how might ag-related items in the state water plan hold up, especially on water quality and quantity? And I know, that's obviously over in the Senate Ag Committee. We got a great chairman there who actually was president of Sedgwick County Farm Bureau before he ran for the legislature. But just where do you think, bigger budget items, and where should an organization like Kansas Farm Bureau poke our heads up and say, hey, we got to have this in the budget, and this state water plan is one of our key priorities?
Well, you should certainly stay vigilant on that issue, because see, we haven't even received the full detail on the governor's budget. I mean, we've had the 22-page sales sheet, right, with the presentation. She does have a better salesman this year, her new budget director. They're investing and enhancing and all kinds of great words that they use to express. But I would keep an eye on that. I mean, and Dan, to your point, you are the ag chairman. I left him there because he's a good man in that area, and I mean, you guys know him and trust him, so he's going to keep. He is also, by the way, on Ways and Means, so he's not just in that on the chair of the ag. He's on the Ways and Means Committee. So I don't know what to say to that, other than you've got a guy there that you can trust on both sides of that. So just stay vigilant and keep him informed.
Great, thank you. That's a great answer, and we'll continue to work with Senator Kirshen. He's a longtime friend, as Ryan mentioned, and does have ag's interest at heart. And it kind of goes back to some of the comments you made earlier. We were talking about earlier with going from an urban rural, the split, and how that's not going to get easier for the rural parts of the state. And Dan Kirshen's a perfect example of a legislator like you, Sedgwick County in his case, but very rural focused. I mean, he's a dairy farmer, farms in that area. And I guess how as a rural, I mean, you both are in a unique spot with your urban and rural ties. And we're, as lobbyists, we're always working on developing those relationships with the people in Mission Hills, the legislators in Mission Hills. I throw that as an example. Anyways, I guess what advice do you have for our members out there? They may not be represented by these people, but how can they engage these urban legislators to get them informed as to what we're doing in agriculture or just in the rural way of life? Some advice.
Well, a couple ways, but I think the primary way to communicate to the metro legislators, because they're not, the number one way you communicate is to your own, but since they're predominantly rural, your own already understand these issues. So that's where you make your money, John, right? So you advocate for them, and they understand numbers, right? They want to know that there are a lot of people out there that this issue is important to them. And so being from Kansas is just number one. Feel free to, you should email, even, especially if you learn as just a rural resident and an interested party, if and I know you keep these guys well informed and so enough to know where some of the issues are, where some of the votes may be or not be. And I think with your assistants and your team, you can direct them, because that communication is important. And when you see, emails and phone calls coming in from fellow Kansans, it's important. And it's always meaningful when it's from somebody who knows what they're talking about. So, so you're earning your keep, John.
Thanks. I'll remind everyone I did not pay you to say that. So no, just we appreciate that, and we do have a great relationship. And I think that you raise a good point that I always tell members out there that they are we're the paid lobbyists, but they're the more effective lobbyists. Our main goal is to have them telling you guys the same thing that we're telling you, and that helps our credibility, and then it helps the organization's credibility at the same time. And I think that's essentially kind of what you were leading to is with your comments as well. So I do have a question here that's coming online, and this one may not be for you, but I'm going to throw it out there because I know it's a question on a lot of people's minds, and I'm sure you being asked this, but got a question that how can us in rural areas like McPherson County get our vaccines? The president says that there's an immediate increase of 16% in the numbers of doses that Pfizer's relabeled the vials to produce 6 doses rather than 5. And yet, there's a lot of people now that we're in phase 2 that are wondering, how are we going to make this happen? I'm going to throw this question to you, knowing that at some level it's out of your hands because the administration handles a lot of that. But you're hearing this, and what would you tell your constituents and our constituents out there?
No, I mean, unfortunately, it's not just a little bit out of my hands, right? It's entirely out. I mean, that's been an executive function, and it's been, unfortunately, a pretty big disaster in the ability to get it out. I mean, and I'm not sure I understand. I don't want to be too disparaging. I just don't understand some of the decisions that were made and how, I mean, for example, they're putting the prisoners in front of the line, and I understand the congregate setting. I understood the guards, but to put someone in prison ahead of grandma just frustrates me. And so, by the way, the other thing I think we have upside down, I got offered the vaccine, right? Because they told me it's a continuity government plan. And frankly, we have a continuity government plan. It's called vice president and lieutenant governor, right? I mean, we have a continuity plan. And I asked if I could give mine away. I was going to try to give mine to my mother-in-law, who's, 76 years old and has a host of comorbidities and issues. So, I mean, now I'm probably ranting too much. The advice would be stay. I think there is I understand there's supposed to be another round and there's more. I wouldn't advocate for people to try to drive to other counties necessarily, unless I suppose you're on the border and that works out. But because some counties we're finding out are better at getting out than others. But the executives are getting them down to the counties. The counties have a function there, and I don't have any good answers on that one, John. I really don't. It's really out of our hands. But I'm glad to see they're starting to become a little more available, if you will.
No, I almost wasn't going to ask it because I know that is not really the function of the legislature right now. But I think it's, as you know, it's a question that's top of mind. I won't even get into the unemployment insurance issues that are going on, but anyways, that I just thought I'd throw it out there as one that was asked. And let's see, we've got another one here. We might wrap it up with this one, Ryan, if that's all right.
Sounds great.
How does the state continue to, and I'm going to read this one. I haven't even gone through it once in my head, so I'm just going to read it directly. How does the state continue to effectively manage the budget when more and more of it is being mandated? For example, how do we maintain roads and bridges when so little is left after education and mandated programs are taking more? This seems like this might be right in your wheelhouse.
It's a really good question, because the truth is you can't manage it long term in the model in which it is. The heavy weight, and I know, I mean, and education's important, right? Public education's important, but the way the mandates are going between K-12 and then the social services, that eats up so much of the budget. There's really not much left over, and there's also lots of misinformation in the public. But the truth is, the way when it's out of the hands of the legislature and the ability to kind of manage that, then you lose the ability to look at and prioritize. It's really budgeting at the legislative level is prioritizing, right? You've taxed the population X amount, and then it's prioritizing what's the most important. And the more that gets mandated, the less ability you have, or even flexibility you have when something may percolate to be more important one year than the other, right? And it said, and this is a good year, right? I mean, by mandate, there needs to be another $240 million in the K-12, and they've been shut. A good portion of them closed for a big chunk of it. But this is the mandate, right? If you don't do this, you're back in the courts, and there are so many other things with that money right now. In Minnie's estimation, and mine in particular, is better. And even the next round of COVID puts another $340 million. So now you're looking at $500 million flowing into one line item when we have all these other extenuating issues, particularly this year. And when you have that kind of a mandate, that is money that could be much better used. And so in the end, we need to get that question in front of the population at some point, right, on the constitutional amendment, to where that authority can be driven back to the representatives of the people.
Yeah. And Mr. President, as you might recall, the Farm Bureau was involved in the last effort to try to put that in front of the voting public in a constitutional amendment. And I guess we look forward to continuing to work with you. I mean, we all have to kind of look at the political tea leaves and see when the right time might be. But I think you hit the nail on the head that this is a long-term issue that we are going to have to address and face at some point. And appreciate your leadership in knowing that and keeping your eye on the ball and trying to figure out the right way to fix this issue, because it is, I mean, I think there's no doubt that as you've been deeply involved in the budget for many years, and there are some major challenges when there's only so much you can control. So with that, I guess do you have any closing comments, Mr. President? Ryan, I'm going to be quiet here. It's not a very natural position for a lobbyist to be quiet, but I'm going to go silent here and let you two close this out. But I appreciate it. Personally, I appreciate you being on. I know the members appreciate it. And next year, we look forward to seeing you in person at our day at the Statehouse. So Ryan, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'll let the president close us out tonight, but just a friendly reminder, this is the second of what we have scheduled, our first 3 fireside chats. So if you have not done so already, please register next week, where we will be hearing from the Speaker of the House, Ron Reichman. And that will be next Wednesday at 7 p.m. And that registration should be in your correspondence that allowed you to register for this one. So with that, Mr. President, thank you so much for joining us. And I'll let you send us off and give us your kind of final comments on what the next few days and the rest of the legislative session looks like. Thank you.
Well, look, my final comments are really just thank you to you guys. Thank you for all you guys that stay engaged and connect with us. The next few days for us are really just the big thing we have now is on the social front. It's valued them both. We have the constitutional amendment that deals with the Hodes decision. That's what's coming up tomorrow. So that's on everybody's mind here. And then once we can make that hurdle, we'll be on to do other business. But with that, really all I can say to you guys is thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be on and for all you guys do.
Thank you, Mr. President, and we'll be in touch.